and Zoning Committee and special called Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, January 10th. This is the Planning and Zoning Committee in case you're in the wrong meeting. The meeting is hereby called to order. We have a second item on our agenda to approve the meeting minutes of the last meeting. I believe they were emailed. Did anyone receive them? Well, we'll dispense with approval of the meeting minutes if they're not received and read, and we'll move on to our zoning case. So who is our presenter?
He's going to be the presenter. I'm just going to introduce the
Oh, okay, introduce Mr. Garrison.
Okay. Well, my name is Michael Ward, and I serve as principal planner here at the city. This is case number ZAC 2023-4, which is a request by the City of Birmingham to amend the City of Birmingham zoning ordinance to revise the off-street parking regulations. The purpose of these regulations is to create a vibrant and livable city by encouraging a multimodal transportation network through the regulation of off-street parking and bicycle parking infrastructure. Currently, the requirements of a minimum number of parking spaces can lead to large amounts of unused surface parking spaces. Unused parking can contribute to the following: reduce walkability and bikeability, increase housing costs, increase amounts of stormwater runoff, hotter, less comfortable neighborhoods due to excessive asphalt and fewer trees. After a stakeholder engagement process and meetings with the Citizens Advisory Board, the proposed parking amendments were considered by the Planning Commission at a special call meeting on June the 20th, 2023. At the meeting, the Commission voted to table the item and asked for the creation of a stakeholder working group to gather more information about parking minimums and other data. The Commission also expressed that a few members of the Commission should participate on the stakeholder working group. At the August 2nd, 2023 Planning Commission meeting, the Commission considered and approved a working group list, and it consisted of commissioners and stakeholders. The first working group meeting was held on August 14th, 2023, and it went over research and information regarding parking minimums. The second working group meeting was held on September the 11th, 2023, and it went over research pertaining to transportation demand management plans. The third working group meeting was led by the Birmingham Department of Transportation, and it focused on parking enforcement. Four public engagement meetings were held to inform the public about the parking reform initiative. The first meeting was held on September the 25th, 2023 at the Birmingham Crossplex. The second meeting was a WebEx meeting that was held on October the 5th, 2023. The third meeting was held at the Avondale Library on October the 10th. And the fourth meeting was a WebEx meeting that was held on October the 16th, 2023. A Planning Commission workshop was held on October the 25th, 2023 to go over the proposal and to answer questions. The proposed parking amendments went before the Birmingham Planning Commission at their regularly scheduled meeting on November the 1st, 2023, and the Commission voted to recommend approval. The vote was 12-2, and that concludes the staff report. Want me to turn everything over to Mom and let me introduce, I'm Hunter Garrison.
Yes, introduce our.
Okay, and let me go ahead and introduce Hunter Garrison, who's senior planner in the city's Department of Planning, Engineering, and Permits.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to park myself up here at the podium.
Yes, park yourself.
All right, so as Principal Planner Michael Ward introduced, this initiative has been dubbed the Right Size Parking Initiative. And I'm just going to jump right into this. So our current requirements are that when a development is built, we require a certain number of parking spaces to be provided on site. They cannot provide more or less than the required number without regulatory action, so going for a zoning variance. And some parts of downtown do not require a certain number. That would be in mixed-use downtown. And other parts, which are mixed-use high, have a 50% reduction in the required parking spaces. There's a small discount available in the required parking for transit proximity or bike rack installation. So our key proposed changes, the big one, minimum parking requirements would be removed. Previous minimums become new maximums for surface parking lots. Parking decks do not have a maximum if the ground level is activated, and by activated, we mean some type of retail or commercial activity on that bottom floor. Developments over a certain size, 25,000 and 50,000 square feet, must submit a transportation demand management plan, which will explain how they intend to manage their parking and transportation demand without minimum parking requirements. Some development types have bicycle parking requirements, and if accessible via a maintained good condition alleyway, residential parking would be required in the rear. So what this does, this initiative is all about right-sizing parking. It's not about building none. It's about building the right amount. So, parking is not going to go away overnight with this. Developers will still continue to build it. We're just advocating for policy that doesn't require a fixed amount and instead allow that parking to be built in a way that is sensitive to the context for where it is set. So, this encourages infill development on vacant lots and smaller lots. It enables affordable and missing middle housing construction. It improves walkability and pedestrian safety. It makes transit more viable due to increased density along corridors, and it addresses stormwater, urban heat island, and climate change. So you can see in this image, this is from Strong Towns, which is a group that advocates for minimum parking reform, among other sort of urbanist initiatives. But you can build this big box store just about anywhere in a commercially zoned area. But this traditional walkable downtown area that has a mixture of commercial types and some residential, that's illegal to build in most places across the United States, but it is a type of development that many people want to see more of. So what this doesn't do, it doesn't eliminate parking altogether. We know it will still be built. Banks will, for a business to be opened or for a development to occur, the banks will usually require that they provide some level of parking to obtain financing. This does not remove ADA parking requirements. It doesn't address curbside parking enforcement. It's another issue. It doesn't address parking in front yards. That's a code enforcement issue. And it does not affect residents' private driveways or garages. So again, parking will still be built. This just lets it be more sensitive to the context in which it exists. So you can see in this graphic, in Seattle and Buffalo, which were two of the first cities to eliminate parking minimums in their zoning code, a considerable amount of the majority of their new developments were still built with some off-street parking. In Buffalo, which is the city that is more similar to Birmingham, 83% still had parking. So, and again, this is something we're granting zoning variances for all the time anyway. Here's the number of cases that we've allowed that for since 2016. Briefly, before I dive into the data and for why we believe that this is good policy, I'm going to go into our outreach summary. So again, as Michael stated, we had a Planning Commission stakeholder working group with 3 meetings, one on minimum parking reform, the other on transportation demand management, and then our colleagues at BDOT presented on what they're doing in regards to parking enforcement. And then we had 4 public engagement opportunities. 2 of those were public open meetings in person, and the other 2 were online webinars for people who are a little more time crunch. And then we also did 2 TDM introductions to developers. We invited, key members of our development community in the city and went over the new TDM requirements with them. So, 4 key reasons to eliminate minimums. Minimums make housing less affordable and limit where it can be built. Parking minimums make sprawl endemic, which prevents a multimodal system from becoming viable by increasing the distance you must travel to any destination. Parking minimums block redevelopment of vacant or underutilized buildings, as complying with minimums can make projects infeasible. And then parking contributes to environmental hazards such as flooding and urban heat island effect. So, I'm going to hammer home some of the facts about housing costs and how it's directly tied to parking. I'm not going to read this whole quote verbatim, but what the data has shown is that, parking minimum requirements are a very regressive policy because lower income individuals tend to own fewer than average vehicles. That forces 5 lower income households to purchase more parking than they need to ensure that 1 higher income household can park all of its vehicles with no extra cost. So we should kind of chew on that for a minute, considering that we have a lot of low-income individuals in our city, but minimum parking requirements are not serving those residents. So housing costs. Again, so this graphic is from 2016, and they found just a single surface spot, not a deck spot, but a single surface spot typically costed renters at that time $142 per month. Adjusted for inflation in 2023, that's closer to $200. And I believe that some of the data sent to me by the Southern Environmental Law Center showed that in Seattle that was $46 per month in rent. And then if you're paying for a deck space or in a dense area, that goes up exponentially. So here's some data that's specific to Birmingham. So in many of our census blocks, we have households, not just individuals, but households that do not have access to a single automobile. Not two automobiles, but one car. And in some of our census blocks, so this one that's pointed out, for example, 47.2%, almost 50% of houses do not have a single automobile. So, who are these parking minimums serving? It's certainly not our residents, because if you look at the majority of census blocks that occur within the city of Birmingham, any that are gray have 20% of households that do not have a single automobile, so that's 1 in 5 houses. So where is this working? In Buffalo and Seattle, more than half of new homes built since 2017 would have been illegal under their previous parking minimum requirements. So you can see in Buffalo, 70%, almost 68% of new housing constructed would have been illegal under their previous zoning code, which had the same level of parking requirements that Birmingham does. So parking creates endemic sprawl. It consumes a disproportionate amount of land. So you can see here that this is downtown, where there haven't been parking requirements for a significant portion of its history, and they've been done away with in other areas. But we still have 26% of land area that's dedicated to parking. So what this also illustrates is that, this is an incremental change. Parking is not going to go away overnight. This is a land use policy that will slowly allow infill, but we're not suddenly going to have a city that's auto-oriented and then overnight or in a year, there's no parking available. What this is going to do is allow a lot of infill opportunities, particularly housing on vacant lots or surface lots, and it's not going to create this massive parking problem overnight. So this is a historic image of Atlanta that I just want to talk about for a moment. So, most people don't know, myself included, who grew up in the Atlanta area, that Atlanta was in fact a walkable urban center at some point in its history. The blue building in the top image is also shown in the bottom image. And on the top, you have street trees, a walkable area, housing, businesses, seems to be thriving. And in the bottom image, it's almost entirely surface parking lots that aren't even full of cars. So I think what's interesting about this as a planner is that if you were to look at this bottom image on a zoning map or a future land use policy map, it would be called out as commercial or retail or office, something like that. But that's really an ancillary land use to surface parking, which is what's actually dominating the landscape there and not really contributing to the fabric of the city, other than urban heat island. So endemic sprawl, it also makes pedestrians less safe. When you build this extremely auto-oriented type of city that parking minimums encourage, you create stroads, these huge multi-lane roads, and you also have a lot more driveway cuts, which is probably the main thing, and that is much more dangerous for pedestrians. We also know that, cars have gotten significantly larger in the past decade. They sit up higher, and that's extremely dangerous for our most vulnerable users, children, people in wheelchairs. And the more driveway cuts we have, which are encouraged by these parking minimums, the more at risk they are simply trying to walk to a destination. So 3, parking minimums enables infill and sprawl repair. You can see in the top left image, this is from the sprawl repair manual, that we have a traditional big box sort of suburban commercial land use, and in the right, that's that same exact image, but it's inlaid with a number of new buildings that create more of a walkable sort of mixed-use center. And, there's still parking available there, and there's quite a bit actually, but that would not be achievable with parking minimums in place. And this is a way that we can rejuvenate a lot of the struggling retail centers, which have a pretty natural life cycle. Something comes in, you have a premier grocery store or retailer, then they move away to a new location, it becomes a thrift grocery or dollar store, and then eventually you have more and more vacancy. So infill and sprawl repair, this type of thing is within reach. You can see this is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which repealed their parking minimums. In the top image, you have this surface parking lot that's right in the middle, so with an additional driveway cut, right in the middle of a walkable, traditional neighborhood center. And then when they repealed their parking minimums, they were able to get this infill development. A CVS was put in. That's a good commercial use that really serves the neighborhood. People can walk to it, and you don't have that missing teeth element of your urban fabric. So 4, parking contributes to flooding issues. Your parking lots create a lot of additional impervious surface. It means less places for water to filter. The EPA recommends reevaluating street and parking lot design standards to do away with those parking minimums. So you can see that if you get rid of these parking minimums, you can enable more space for these bioswales and rain management areas that are also more pleasant to walk by. And then urban heat island effect is naturally exacerbated by more surface parking, large black asphalt lots increase the heat, and the world's getting warmer. This is becoming an increasing problem. And the EPA study found that daytime temperatures in urban areas are 7 degrees Fahrenheit higher in warmer months than surrounding ones. So, and finally, these minimums are not science-based or data-driven to begin with. They were made up in the 1970s using using parking lot surveys that were conducted on Black Friday in suburban retail centers. So when this ITE parking generation manual was established, there's a base assumption in the argument that the ideal landscape or ideal urban fabric is suburban and auto-oriented. So it perpetuates that. And as long as you have these minimums, that's the exact result you're going to get. So you can see on this loop, you want a generous parking supply that disperses your development patterns. You naturally spread out because you have to dedicate more land to parking. That increases vehicle ownership because suddenly, or not so suddenly, it has happened over time, you have a very auto-oriented society or city that you need a car to get anywhere from A to B. That further encourages automobile-oriented transportation planning. This reduces travel options, alternative modes like riding a bus or riding in a bus or riding a bike become stigmatized. It suburbanizes our cities, which has happened in Birmingham and other cities across the United States. And then we do more automobile-oriented land use planning, and then we complete the loop and we continue to sprawl out versus building more densely and building a city that's oriented around people and walkability versus a city that's really prioritizing cars at the exclusion of residents. So here's a case study from Buffalo, New York. Again, this is one of our cities where we have the most data related to removing parking minimums. And this data is from the Journal of the American Planning Association. It analyzed 37 major new developments over 2 years. And what they actually found when they removed parking minimums, so you can see on the top bar, there is what the old minimums would have required for each development type. And then new spaces is what was built. And then there's the total change. So for their mixed-use developments, the old minimums would have required 1,500-ish parking spaces. Once they reformed their parking minimum requirements, they built 726. With residential, the old minimums were 650. They built 760, so actually more. Commercial was a similar story. Old minimums 177. New parking that was built was 291. And they ended up with a net decrease in 502 parking spaces. But this data shows that, when you get rid of these minimums, developers are not all of a sudden going to just develop like crazy with no parking. If they perceive that they need parking to be successful because they know the area and they know their business, then they will build parking and they will have it available. If they're building in a mixed use or walkable area, they know they can probably get by with less parking because it's already more walkable, more bikeable, etc. And they build what they think they need. It's letting the market drive it. It's actually a real free market sort of approach to it. And I'm not a restaurateur, I'm a planner. I don't know how many tables they need or how many parking spaces. So another big point, parking minimums are an economic drain on cities. This is from Jefferson County, Kentucky, not Alabama. But this high-rise condo generates $384,000 annually in property taxes. The corresponding surface lots, in contrast, pay a quarter of what the apartment building does. And this is important because we're basically giving away all this land for free for the storage of privately owned vehicles. And this cost is really, it's about more than the financial loss of the property tax, because we're providing infrastructure all along these parking lots. So we're just continuing to sprawl out, and it's not productive for our city from a land use policy perspective or from a financial management perspective. So what do we replace parking minimums with to ensure our destinations are accessible? That's transportation demand management, which I'll reference as TDM going forward. TDM is mode neutral. So you can see in this graphic that parking minimums are on the left. It's assuming that everyone is driving a single occupancy vehicle. On the right is a TDM approach where the majority are still driving a single occupancy vehicle. It acknowledges that, but it's also acknowledging that people may walk, use transit, bike, use Uber, things like that. They might have more flexible work schedules, or they might ride share or carpool. So how does TDM work? Developers would be required to provide a threshold number of TDM measures to address transportation demand. If they're over that size threshold, the number of measures they must include is dependent on the size of the development, and developments are not allowed to build zero parking and not demonstrate how they will address demand if there are these large, impactful development types. So this is simply a flow chart that shows what those TDM requirements would be. So if a development's 25,000 to 50,000 square feet, it goes into tier 1. Or if it's mixed use downtown and high and greater than 50,000 square feet, it's also in that tier 1. They have to meet 10 points of our TDM strategies. You actually have in your packet a table of what those points values are and how it would work. And then developments that are bigger than that, so 50,000 square feet, have a higher threshold, which would be 15 points. Developments that are less than 25,000 square feet, single-family developments, industrial developments, and mixed-use downtown high developments less than 50,000 square feet do not require a TDM plan. So here's some examples of what these TDM measures can be. Shared parking agreements, private parking lots, carpool, vanpool, on-site car share, subsidized transit passes. That's a really good example. I will elaborate on that one a little bit because there's been some innovative work done in Buffalo on that one. But in Buffalo, they had a development built that was for people recently transitioning out of homelessness, and they did not own a car oftentimes. So it had less surface parking spaces, but they bought bulk transit passes for all the residents, and it was along a transit line. So the people residing in that apartment development were able to utilize the transit very efficiently, and they didn't need to dedicate so much land to parking. So improved bike parking facilities is another example, dedicated micromobility spaces, commuter information centers, traffic calming design, and then meeting our low impact development standards are all things that can get points towards this TDM requirement. So final takeaway, parking convenience and walkability exists on a spectrum, and today we skew very heavily towards parking convenience, and that comes at a cost to our city. We know that these parking minimums are ultimately well-intentioned. It sounds like a good idea to ensure that everyone will have a parking space anytime they go to a destination, but through years of having these standards, we've seen that they take a very detrimental toll on cities, and it's not worth that trade-off just to have a little bit of convenience, because it enables infill, it makes our multimodal system more viable, it reduces suburban sprawl, it has negative environmental effects versus a little bit of convenience in some instances. So, thank you.
Well, your presentation that you just showed us, do you have copies of it?
I do.
Could we have them?
Oh, and right now, I did not print copies of that.
Okay. So you don't need a decision today?
Yes, we would like a decision today, I believe.
Well, I hate to say it about these TVs, but everything that was on there was unreadable except the drawings because of the distance, I suppose.
Well, it is a presentation that I have presented to you and the Planning Commission multiple times. This was just an abbreviated version of that. And we'll also be presenting to the Committee of the Whole. this coming Tuesday, in which case I will present to you a full copy of the presentation, and you'll actually hear a longer version of it.
Okay, well, that'll be helpful. Counselor Smitherman?
Is there any way you can email it to us right now? No.
If I'm on the server, potentially.
It's just this my first committee meeting, so
Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't heard this before.
Okay. Here, let me. Just print the PDF. He's gonna go make physical copies for you.
Okay.
So we'll get that down.
Thank you.
Okay. Counselor, President O'Quinn?
Yeah, if you can get it to us, I can have staff print off some copies real quick. But I did wanted to ask, in regards to the 50,000 square feet requirement for TDM, how was that 50,000 square foot number arrived upon?
So it was, could staff in the back put the presentation back on the display? Is that possible? So to answer the question though, it's 25,000 or 50,000 square feet. 50,000 is the larger threshold. That was determined as when we initially started this process, it was just 50,000, but then we looked at other case studies of cities that have TDM, and that's a very common number that they use for the larger development types. So Denver, Colorado, and Austin, Texas have these TDM measures, and they trigger at 50,000 square feet, sometimes at 25,000, which is what our base is.
Okay, so explain to me the different thresholds at 25 versus 50.
So if you are if a property is zoned mixed use high or mixed use downtown, it falls into that tier 1 if it's greater than 50,000 square feet. If it's if it's not in those two zoning categories, so if let's say it's a general commercial, big box store or whatever, if it's 25,000 to 49999, it's tier 1 and must meet the 10 points. And then everything else that's over 50,000 falls into tier 2. So any development that is greater than 50,000 square feet and is not mixed use downtown or high falls into tier 2 and must meet the 15 points.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, I want to follow up with Mr. Gambrell. And yesterday in our council meeting, we had the question come up about whether or not this would apply to existing developments. There was some question about that. Have you gotten any clarity on that?
We discussed it briefly. We really haven't finalized our opinion, but I believe that, when this is adopted, it'll be the policy of the city. And so any development that comes in after that point would follow this code. Existing developments that change or redevelopment of an existing property would follow the same new code.
Mm-hmm. So give me some appreciation for the ZBA's granting of variances. So, how frequently are they receiving requests for parking variances? And what do those requests look like? Are they, telling Walmart, I'm using an extreme example here. Are they telling Walmart that you can move into the middle of a neighborhood and not have any parking, or, give me some appreciation for
The types of modifications that
yeah.
occur. I think it kind of, it happens in two ways, really. Many developers will attempt to especially if they're in the downtown area, will attempt to rezone to mixed-use downtown with the intent, partly their intent is to eliminate their parking minimum so that they can, determine that on their own. And so there are several, especially developments around Railroad Park. There's, I think, 7 there that rezoned to mixed-use downtown so that they would not have a parking minimum requirement, but in fact built, several hundred parking spaces. And then parking modifications generally occur downtown, Lakeview, places like that. And I think there's a slide in here, there's a number, several hundred parking spaces have been modified over the course of the last few years. So it's almost become routine for somebody to ask for a modification and have it granted. We do track, where those modifications occur and attempt to estimate, what supply may be available. But generally speaking, when somebody seeks out a modification, we ask them to either demonstrate that they have public parking within walking distance, which I think we say is about a quarter mile, 1,320 square feet, or they demonstrate that there's adequate parking on the street. And when they do use that second method, we ask them to do a survey of the street and show us, where cars are parked during different times of the day and different days of the week. And so they use that as justification for a modification. But I know we have a slide in the presentation that shows how many have occurred in different parts of the city over the course of the last few years. And there's quite a number, and it's several hundred spaces.
2,851 since 2016.
Yeah. That have been modified.
Tell me that again. What's the context for that number?
That's the number of parking space variances granted. So parking spaces that weren't required to be built since 2016 is 2,851.
Okay. So I want to come back to something you just mentioned. So there's been a lot of development in the Parkside district specifically. And those developers applied for mixed use downtown so that they wouldn't have a parking requirement, yet they built parking.
Yeah, they built hundreds of spaces, yeah.
Right, so, I assume each one of those residential buildings has hundreds of spaces. Did they build more parking than they would have been required to?
I don't know that. I don't know that.
Okay.
Anything else?
I don't think so.
Oh, there's plenty there. So, Councilor Smitham,
Can you repeat how many requests have been made for parking variances? Was it the 2,000?
So this is for the number of spaces, not the exact number of requests. So for example, if a development needed 50 spaces and they requested this variance to not have minimums, then that would count as 50. So it's 2,851 spaces total would have been required if the variances were not granted. So that would be almost 3,000 additional parking spaces in the city.
I think the important thing to think about there too is that if those modifications had not been granted, some of those businesses may not have been built or that housing.
Okay. I don't have any more right now.
okay, so, but of course, everyone is counting on the same on-street parking. Everybody is looking at it and saying, yes, we have on-street parking, and then it gets used up very quickly because you've got 50 businesses all trying to use the same parking spaces. That doesn't seem to be an item of consideration. But in the Avondale area, many of those variants, they're not variances, they're parking modifications that were granted caused issues for other businesses and local residents who ended up with people parking at their homes because they couldn't find a parking place on street because everybody's using the same on-street parking. So it's a fallacy to think that every business can look at the same on-street parking and they can all send their customers or employees to park in those same places because they're not triple-decker parking spaces. They just accommodate one car. So I don't know about Dr. O'Quinn, but I know in Avondale, we've gotten lots and lots of complaints about the parking modifications that have been given away by the ZBA. It's not all sweetness and light. You know, they got it, but it was inappropriate.
Certainly not. I think the only thing I would say to that point is that, you know, parking is ultimately a paradox. Great places drive a lot of demand, which can be seen as a need for parking, but great places aren't full of surface parking lots. That's not the type of places people want to go and spend their time. So I think the city has to decide if it wants to become a walkable, pedestrian-friendly city that puts people first, as set forth in the goals of the comprehensive plan, or if it wants to prioritize the storage of privately owned automobiles.
Yeah, and my only point was you can't give every business the same on-street parking because there's not enough of it to go around. You know, that's an issue. Can you tell us about there's no key with this chart that's on page 79. The automobile parking, surface, it says in all of the dwelling districts that it's SE.
So that would be for a standalone use, a standalone use of a surface parking lot would be a special exception. So SE is special exception.
Okay, but so if you live in a D1, D2, or D3 zone district, you need a special exception to park on the surface?
I don't believe I'm following your.
Well, I'm trying to
No,
read
that would be so that's just a standalone use. If, you know, a home or a business has a parking lot built on their parcel, then that's not a standalone use, and that parking lot is absolutely allowed.
Okay, but we wouldn't have parking lots in D1 and D2 and D3 in all likelihood because those are single-family zone districts.
Correct.
So why would
Right.
we need surface parking lots?
Counselor, this would be amended, as we spoke this morning at Planning Commission, that special exception for a parking lot that's adjacent to a commercial.
Oh, this is the one where you
It's the
wanted to
same,
let
it's the exact same
commercial-
thing, yeah. And so this will be reworded to tailor, or to match what we discussed this morning at Planning Commission.
Yeah, on page 131, there is a section 6 proposed that would allow for commercial, manufacturing, and industrial uses to have parking lots in the dwelling zone districts. And the Planning Commission did not agree that that was an intelligent thing to do.
Right, and that is a existing part of our ordinance. That is not part of the proposed changes that we are discussing now. So that already exists in our zoning ordinance, and as discussed at Planning Commission, we will reword that.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty insane. We're waiting to hear from DOT about our resident-only parking, and instead we get parking lots for manufacturing, commercial, and industrial people to use. Didn't make a lot of sense, but I'm glad we fixed it. So at this point, since I think we've not got questions right now because everybody hasn't finished reading the material, can we hear about how enforcement is coming along? Because I think most of us haven't noticed that there is any. And we were kind of.
Director Fowler is going to give you an update on that.
Good afternoon.
Good
Christina
afternoon.
Argo with the Department of Transportation. Director Fowler is going to make copies of our 12 steps to remind everybody where we're at with those steps. So I'll just kind of walk through, when he gets back, we can kind of go through the first 4 steps that are already in progress. But the biggest update we have is related to towing cars for public safety violations for, when folks are parked in bike lanes and bus stops and intersections where they're, impeding visibility in intersections. And so, so that's kind of our step number 1 when it relates to parking enforcement. And so we've been approved to have 40 hours a week of overtime BPD officer time to engage in that activity. So that will make a huge difference with, just kind of the whole wild, wild west concept of folks parking wherever they feel like they can make a spot. So we've got some dedicated officers now that will be doing that kind of towing. So that's one piece of the parking enforcement update.
And when will this begin?
Now, they've been approved to use that amount of time and money to have officers sign up for those shifts. So that's happening now. Just to jump back to step number 1 under our reform strategy. So it's revised regulations for private off-street parking lots, booting, and towing policies. So just an update on where we're at with that revised ordinance that we passed last fall. We've been working with commercial and non-commercial parking lot owners over the last 3 or 4 months. It's been a little slow going, but we're getting there as far as getting everybody up to code for the new ordinance and sign requirements. We are giving everybody till February 1st before we start enforcing. So you should start seeing in the next week or 2. Thank you. Do y'all want to see a copy of this? Our new signs go into effect.
And this will include people who park on the crosswalks, the sidewalks, in front of fire hydrants, all of those.
Exactly. So that's step number 2. So step number 1, we'll begin enforcing February 1, and everybody should be seeing those really large red signs that have all the details related to the parking lot that you are parking in, as well as phone numbers and web addresses for if you have an issue or you need to find out where your car is if something does happen. And if we look to step number 3, refresh Park Mobile signage and stickers. We are expanding into the Parkside District with metered parking, and that those business owners and residents have been notified. In fact, it was probably early this week or last week that we're expanding our enforcement zone into the Parkside District. So it's basically from 1st to 3rd Avenue South, from 18th Street to 14th Street. We feel like that will really help support our local businesses and enable turnover in that parking inventory down there, so folks are not storing their cars for 8 hours a day, 24 hours a day, where the cars just sit on the street and aren't moving. And so that will enable us to see some good support of, good. I'm sorry, I'm moving something on your computer, but let me do this. Nobody can see it. So that's happening. I expect to see signs up in the next month for that. And then step 4, we are continuing to work with the Office of the City Attorney on our policy for towing of cars for unpaid violations. So that is something that is currently underway and will be, as soon as we have a draft, it'll come to you guys for feedback.
These will be for all violations, such as parking violations.
That's right.
I can't wait for that.
We are really looking to create a culture of compliance within the city. So it's not about paying of parking tickets. It's about getting folks to comply and to realize that, you know, we do have a functioning system and it does work when people comply with the rules. Because there is enough parking for everybody if we have accountability and compliance with the system. May not be at the front door, but
We can't wait.
okay. I can't wait either. Other questions? Y'all want to walk through some of the other steps or?
President O'Quinn.
I don't know if this is appropriate time to ask this question, but I know that a remaining significant contributing factor to the problems that people have been experiencing that ultimately gets them their vehicle towed is related to the Park Mobile platform. Specifically, that the way the Park Mobile app is set up is ironically too easy to use. So you can set up multiple vehicle profiles in the app, and it's incumbent upon you, the user, to make sure that you select the correct vehicle profile for the vehicle that you're parking, and that you've also updated the vehicle license number that's in your profile. You know, for the cases that we have seen, you know, where people are complaining, sending their complaints to us, a significant proportion of them are directly related to I didn't have the right vehicle profile, or I put a new license plate on and parking enforcement systems didn't recognize the license plate, so on and so forth. So I think that's indicative of an inherent flaw in the Park Mobile app. It's again, ironically, too easy to use. You know, somebody's in a hurry, they're late for happy hour, 5 minutes left, they're trying to get to the bar, and they just click through the prompts. And it ends that girls' night out ends up costing them additional $166 because their vehicle got towed. And, oh, by the way, they probably got treated like dirt by, the individuals that towed their vehicle and or had other unpleasant experiences related to that. So, my point is that I think, I would appreciate knowing that we've asked Park Mobile to address the issue. And I personally, the idea that I would offer them is make it mandatory that every time a person parks and they're using the Park Mobile app, that they physically have to go behind their vehicle and snap a picture of their license plate in order to complete the transaction. And I think that would eliminate that problem.
So we have certainly had conversations with Park Mobile around additional messaging, and alerting folks to making sure that they have all their information in order. But as you know, a lot of folks just breeze right through those messages. But I certainly will take that idea back to the Park Mobile team and see if that's something they could implement. Maybe it's not something they want to do internationally with their app, but it could be something they could do locally for our market.
So the other thing that I would say is that the city of Birmingham has given Park Mobile an exclusive enterprise agreement to operate in the city of Birmingham. We don't allow any other, payment systems for the on-street parking, at least. So they are in privileged circumstances with the city of Birmingham. From my perspective, if they can't fix it, we can go out and find somebody who has a better platform that can eliminate this problem.
Sure. Good point.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Counselor Smitham?
as somebody who uses the app quite frequently, I think it's just a matter of carelessness when people do it, because sometimes my dad does that. But I get what you're saying. Maybe they need to do it when they initially sign up. I know in DC they use it, and it's been found very effective. So I think it's good. Park Mobile, I think it's been very effective. I just said that personally, but I get what you're saying as well. People making sure they have the right car tag when they sign up for it. So, and it's
Keeping it
good because they
updated.
give you an alert when it's about 15 minutes away, and I'll be like, oh, I need to sign up for more hours. So, I found it very beneficial.
Yeah, and I agree, for 99% of the users, never experience a problem.
Maybe 95.
Oh, okay, 95. The other 5% are the ones that we hear from who tell us, I'm never coming back to downtown Birmingham again because I had this awful experience. So I think it's fixable.
I guess my thing would be, would you say the same thing about DC? Because, I mean, they have, like, we're not the only city that has it, so you can't satisfy it. I know what you're saying, because that's your district, but.
But not everybody has 37 municipalities surrounding them that other people can go to and get the heck out of Birmingham. So, we have an issue here of lots of municipalities people can escape to. And I think that's something that all these other cities don't have. We just, they're just surrounding us, licking their chops, I don't know. And I don't use Park Mobile, so I can't get into this too much, except I like the idea of taking a picture of your tag to end the transaction. And then I wanted to ask, can a person park in a space and stay there for 8 hours just by renewing it over and over and over again? So they just park there all day?
Technically you can, but you have to start a new parking session every single time you want to extend past the 2 hours.
But I thought the point of having parking meters was so the parking would turn over and businesses could have people actually come and find a parking place. So if you allow people to just renew over and over and over, if they're lazy and they have plenty of money, no big deal. But that does not comport with the reason we have metered parking is to make it turn over.
Sure, absolutely.
Hi, James Fowler. I serve as the director of the city's Department of Transportation. So currently the app does allow you to do that, even though the policy is that you're not supposed to do that. The incentive to not do that is you're then paying that fee over a long period of time. And I think a lot of our dialogue and framework around this issue assumes that we'll continue with with the same very low on-street parking fee that we have today. But I think if we compare ourselves to other cities, we'll find that our on-street parking fee is much lower than it probably should be. So someone that, say, not to pick on anybody, but somebody that, say, works at Children's Hospital, today they're parking in the Parkside District. A lot of those folks that are in the Parkside District are leaving their cars for a long period of time and walking because they don't want to pay whatever that internal fee is. However, we're moving to meter a lot of those spaces, and so now that will become $8 a day, or actually, no, it would be more than that. So that daily fee over the period of a month is going to be a pretty strong incentive to then buy a parking pass in either UAB or with Children's Hospital or work with any of the employers over there to find an off-street parking space. So even though folks are maybe doing that today, it becomes a pretty strong incentive to not do that. Plus, our goal is to reevaluate fees going forward, and particularly in areas that have really high parking pressure and demand. So 5 Points South, for example, those fees need to be appropriate to that demand so that it forces that turnover. And then it becomes really not so much an issue of, how long somebody wants to leave their car in that space, because they can then make that decision based on a price kind of decision. And so we don't have to be in charge of enforcing so much how long somebody leaves their car there. We will evaluate future prices with the city council. That's not something that we're proposing or discussing today, but that is something that we need to visit very soon. But just know that there is a built-in incentive for someone not to leave their car all day. So even if they're choosing to do that.
Okay. This item that you gave us, can you just run through it real quick and tell us what all is in here? It's been a while since we
Sure.
heard your presentation and update fee structure. Whose fee structure? Is it the Park Mobile or is it the Parking Authority? So just if you
Oh,
can
yeah.
just
Okay.
real quickly
Sure.
go through these other, 5, 6, and 12 and all those.
Are we good with 1 through 4?
I am.
I just
I
ran
think
through
I
it, so I just wanna
understand
make
them
sure.
and sounds good and.
Okay. All right, so if we get into steps 5 and 6, confirm we have an up-to-date, actively managed database of parking violations, and then procure technology for accessing the parking violations database in the field real time. So right now, we do have a database of folks, of parking violations. And so what we need to do is to dig in with the several departments that are involved with that data and information to make sure what we have is up to date, and most likely we will have to procure some new technology so we're able to access that information in real time. So our officers, our parking enforcement officers, will have access to that information while they're out in the field, because currently we're not able to do that. So that's a really key step in getting to this culture of compliance, and it goes along with, the policy that we're working on now to determine, what will that threshold be around unpaid parking violations. Does that make sense?
So the meter, there used to be meter maids,
Parking enforcement
enforcement
officers.
people, okay, they would not be doing this? They have the little handheld devices that are supposed to tell them everything they want to know. They wouldn't be enforcing parking, police officers would be enforcing the parking?
Parking enforcement officers will still be enforcing parking, but those handheld devices you mentioned are not where that they have all that information in their hand at the moment. So
So
that's
they
what we're
don't know
gonna,
if you have 275 tickets in your trunk?
not currently,
Yeah.
not currently.
There are people like that. I rode with one time and he opened his glove compartment and like 50 tickets fell out, on me, because I was the passenger and I said, what the? There are people like that.
Absolutely.
They just collect the tickets because they know we're incapable of doing anything about it
At the moment.
at
That
the
will
moment.
change.
But yeah, that's why I'm so happy to hear that we're finally going to do something.
That's right. Okay, moving on to step number 7, creating a business plan for the parking system. So that is really kind of something that is bubbling along in the background as we, update technology and continue, or work on our policy, for unpaid violations. So that is something that's going to be working. I'll be honest, I haven't created the business plan at the moment, but it is something that's going to be happening in the next 6 months. So, because it really does help us determine what kind of resources we need going forward, what it's going to take to get our system firing on all cylinders. So that's number 7. And then, working with the administration to build capacity in VDOT and BPD to grow our system. We have a lot of things we want to accomplish when it gets down to, 9, 10, 11, 12, and we're going to need some extra capacity there to help us get there. Because the structure we have right now, it would be hard to support a lot of the new initiatives that we're proposing with some of the parking reform. So then the really exciting stuff to me is the 9, 10, 11, 12. So looking at our fee structure, and that is related to, price you pay for on-street parking. And we'll also be coordinating with, BPA. They manage currently the off-street parking, so it's really important that the on-street and the off-street parking pricing is correct. So it drives behavior the way it should. On-street parking is a premium. It's the most convenient, should be higher priced than parking spots off-street in a deck. Okay, so create a system of parking benefit districts. And do you want to talk in detail about the parking benefit districts?
So obviously, it's never a popular topic to talk about raising parking fees. But one of the ways that cities have found a path forward for doing that is to create a system of what are called parking benefit districts. And so that is where, so say if you park on the north side of downtown or, within a few blocks of 20th Street, for example, if that was a district. If you park there, then a portion of your parking fee goes into an account that can then get reinvested into that district. So things like sidewalk repairs, brick repair, landscaping, lighting, other, additional trash pickup, whatever the thing may be, but to reinvest a portion of that money that's collected in that district, that's a way that business owners and residents have found it more attractive to then play with the dynamics of an appropriate fee. So we would think that that would be a really important part. So 5 Points South, for example, that's an area where there's a tremendous amount of parking pressure. So to set a fair rate, we probably need to raise the parking rate. Well, in doing that, we'll obviously collect more revenue. A portion of that revenue needs to get reinvested back into 5 Points South for, again, brick repair, sidewalk repair, landscaping and lighting and those kinds of things that benefit the district. So that's the concept of a parking benefit district.
So we would be charging for parking at night instead of just saying at 6 o'clock it's free.
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. I think a lot of the framework that we have today for parking and many other aspects of our built environment assume that downtown is a place that we commute to during the day and then leave at night. But as Birmingham changes, just like cities across the country, we're finding that our downtowns are more vibrant and operate on nights and weekends as well. That space, which is competed for and sought after, needs to be managed appropriately to be fair for everybody. So we do need to expand our hours of enforcement, and we need to be enforcing on the weekends, and that's policies that we can work on with the city council over time as we grow this system, but that's absolutely part of where we need to be headed.
Okay, so the parking benefit districts, those would be ones close to the high-intensity, high-activity locations, and presumably people would be willing to park further away if they didn't have to pay such a high fee to be near where the action is, right?
That's right, yes, ma'am. Some people may feel more comfortable parking a few blocks away and walking, so that would be their choice.
Okay, and the fee structure is on-street, which is just, I guess Park Mobile just collects the money, right?
That's right,
and
yes,
then
ma'am.
gives us a little back.
That's right, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then BPA do we have anything to do with any other parking?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Do we have anything to do with any other parking besides the on-street and what the parking authority manages for us?
The city of Birmingham only owns a couple, maybe it's 3 or 4 surface lots around town. So the parking that we primarily manage overwhelmingly is on-street parking spaces. The city does then partner with the parking authority to manage off-street assets for the most part.
and I hate to ask this, but the new meters, are they going to be built such that everyone can't just break into them and leave parts laying on the sidewalk?
So cities nationally are starting to phase out physical meters altogether. So in the same way that, newspapers are starting to phase out, it's expected that you would have either a smartphone that you can use the app, or that you can at least make a phone call to the number that's provided on the sign to pay for your space.
Okay, so there will no longer be money.
I'm expecting, yes, ma'am, that we'll phase out physical meters.
Yeah, there's a lot of them with no heads and no feet and no nothing. Okay, yes,
Yep.
President O'Quinn.
So, some of this is aspirational and probably, well, let's hope that it's not years down the road, but love the idea of parking benefit districts. I mean, technically, it's our public right of way. We can put a meter anywhere we want to. And we don't necessarily have to give anybody a portion of the revenue, right?
That's right.
Not that that's not the right thing to do, but that's just the reality of the situation. But assuming that we would want to do parking benefit districts, and it directly benefits some of the adjacent property owners, do you guys envision them having having a voice in determining how that revenue gets utilized?
I would think so, absolutely. I don't want to get too far into the future in designing that program, but absolutely, we would want feedback in how that money gets used.
Thanks.
Pressure washing the sidewalks.
Absolutely.
I mean, with the new caps moving into 5 Point South, the things that they said that they would be doing are the things that the property owners and the businesses are usually complaining about, just how nasty everything looks. So, graffiti removal and tree planting and probably trimming, those kind of things that would make businesses happy. Of course, they'd like for us to cut down all our trees, but hopefully we won't do that. Okay, and can you expound on what number 12 means?
Yes, ma'am. So that's the holy grail, I think, that we've been talking about in so many of our meetings. So that's to get to where we are managing parking, or able to manage parking in residential areas, particularly residential areas that are adjacent to commercial districts. So that's one of the primary concerns, I think, when we're talking about parking minimums is, what to do about overflow parking. And so there's a path to get to, and I don't believe that this path is aspirational. It's been implemented in other cities, and we very much intend to step through all of these steps. And to get to a residential parking program. So we would like to see where, particularly in those residential areas that are experiencing those parking pressures, that we have a residential parking district where if you would like to park your car on the street, then you have to have a permit or pay some sort of fee appropriately to manage that. In my mind, the way that would work is that long-term parkers, so residents that need to store their vehicle in the city's right-of-way, then maybe they pay a very small fee, and of that fee goes back into sidewalk repairs and things like that. But people like visitors that are coming for a short-term basis, they would pay a higher fee, and that would be the incentive to discourage too much overflow parking. So I think that's probably the fairest structure for how to manage that. But we can debate the policies of that as we get to it. That doesn't have to be it, but some sort of pricing mechanism is probably appropriate to help regulate how that space is used.
Yeah, but the issue, because other districts have the problem, I realize, but I've got a big problem, UAB and St. Vincent's. Okay, the residents don't want all those patients and people parking in front of their house all day while they go to the doctor and have their knee fixed. They want them not to come at all. You know, so charging them a high fee doesn't fix the residents' problem of coming home and finding a bunch of strange people parked in front of their home and they can't get within a block. You know, that's the concern. So, you know, I don't view it as a money-making proposition. It seems to me it would be a break even for residents. But I'm not even sure we want to even start talking about inviting, you know, everybody else, you pay a higher fee and you can come park in the neighborhood. Because that's what people are already, well, people are already parking in the neighborhood because they don't want to pay UAB and St. Vincent's fees for parking in their decks or their remote lots or whatever it is they've got. It's easier to come park in front of someone's home and just leave your car there all day. What are you going to do about it? You know,
I think a justification for building in some sort of a cost incentive is it takes us out of, I guess, micromanaging the rules of how that space can be used and just creates a blanket incentive that pushes people to behave appropriately. So some examples might be in the district around where we have the new stadium in Uptown, for example. Right now, so anybody could park for free in any of the streets around there. We could implement a policy where we preclude anybody from doing that, from having visitors, but currently people find workarounds for that, and there's not really a system for managing that very well. What would probably be more fair and more effective is to allow visitors to park there, but to pay, and the fee could be as high as we want it to be, but to pay a really strong fee and that money go back to benefiting those residents through sidewalk repairs, lighting, pressure washing, cleaning, whatever the need may be, but allow that pricing mechanism to regulate that. If we are just doing that ourselves, it tends to not be effective, not because we're not effective managers, but just that style of kind of managing like who's a visitor and who's not becomes very cumbersome and almost undoable.
well, what they want is a place to park their car.
Yes, ma'am.
You know. President O'Quinn?
Yes, so somewhat related, under number 9, updating the fee structure, do you envision dynamic pricing as part of that updated fee structure?
That is definitely what we would propose. So there are parts of downtown where it's really easy to find a parking space, or it may be easy during certain times of the day to find a parking space. And so parking there should be perhaps not free, but a nominal fee. However, when there is really, really high surging demand, so, 5 Points South, there's probably really high demand, a lot of times during the week, then that fee probably needs to be higher because it is an incentive. And the idea is not for the city to make revenue. That is an effect of the process, but the idea is to just regulate the parking for capacity so that that space is used efficiently. And so to your question, that is absolutely what we would propose. Cities nationally are starting to implement dynamic fee structures, so we wouldn't be reinventing the wheel. And that's what the industry believes is a best practice. So.
Is it conceivable to think that dynamic pricing could be used in residential parking districts? So the resident would have, say, a fixed fee. But, the non-residents who might, want to park in that area, if there's tons of space available, on the street, then they may pay one fee. But if there's, if it's really congested, there would be a higher fee to disincentivize them from utilizing that parking.
Absolutely. And there's definitely a property value benefit or a benefit to the property owners by allowing some visitors to park on their street if we have parking benefit districts, because that money can then go into so many of those things that folks are already, complaining to us about. I'll also just throw out that managing a high fee for overflow parking next to UAB or St. Vincent's would probably pretty well squash a lot of that behavior, because it's already subsidized for you to buy a UAB parking pass. So they offer a very affordable monthly parking pass. They can provide the parking, but people are just choosing not to do it. And so if we charge a fair fee and enforce that for the residential areas around there, we're not going to see nearly as much of that as we've been seeing.
That's good. Because these people have no alternative. They don't have homes with driveways and garages because the houses were built before cars were invented. So that's the big issue. And some of those houses have a lot of people living in them, and they all have cars. And a lot of them are young, and they still have cars.
Okay, so just to kind of sum everything up, we're looking to create a culture of compliance. And to reiterate what James said, it's not about the parking fee, but it's about how we can utilize the spaces the most efficient way. And I think it's whoever came up with the idea of parking benefit districts is genius to be able to put that money back in, that built environment. Another point is we are working closely with UAB and BPA related to, their long-term goals and vision, parking, pricing strategy. And so that we're not going to be making these decisions in a vacuum. They are close partners of ours, and that we will continue to coordinate the work with.
Good. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we are at either decision time or put it off until we read this stuff time, or where are y'all? I know you're both new
Yeah.
or semi-new to planning and zoning, and so it's really not very fair to have all this dumped on you at one time. Sorry.
Roughly familiar. I'll just admit, I have not read through the red line document in its entirety, so, but that being
Well, we
said,
meet every 2 weeks. We could
Right.
put it off until our next meeting so that we could actually, I've certainly read it and sent in my questions to none of which have been answered. But, I've read it several times, but I know
Yeah.
y'all have just been surface exposed. So we do meet every 2 weeks, and we can, certainly in 2 weeks, that's enough time to read it.
well, I guess, my only question is that for committee of the whole, we have to plan the agenda in advance, so the intent was to have this presented at committee of the whole next Tuesday. So if we didn't take action here today, would that preclude, having, this presented at committee of the whole?
I think committee of the whole takes precedence over all other committees, and so certainly the members of this committee are members of the committee of the whole. So it seems that we could put our decision off until committee of the whole and then make the decision as a council, as a committee of the whole.
I think that's a good idea.
Because I think there's a lot here. It's like, there's just a lot here. Sometimes you have to read it over 3 or 4 times just to figure out what it says. So,
Counselor, can I make a comment about that? In order to satisfy the zoning ordinance, if we were to take a vote at committee of the whole, it would need to be a joint committee of the whole and P and Z called, special called meeting.
Yeah, we can do
Yeah,
that.
the
I
ordinance
mean,
requires that the decision's made at P and Z.
Well, all of our meetings are joint meetings.
Okay,
We've always got the committee of the whole in our regular meetings, and so we could just reverse it and have the committee of the whole meeting and joint planning and zoning committee meeting at the same time on next Tuesday.
Okay,
Because even I, who have read this thing over and over, would like to, like, one more time, just to be sure. Because it is a lot, and once we make a decision, it's made. And if entities come and they build insufficient parking and there's a big problem, it's our fault, but we don't have any cure for it. We can't say, we changed our minds, you've got to build some parking. That's not going to work. So I think that probably that's a good solution, is for us to delay our decision until the joint meeting with the committee of the whole. And then we probably need to make sure that all of the information is given to all the council members, probably like now, so that they have time to fit it in to their busy lives, because, we've all got busy lives, and after you stack all this stuff up, there's a lot.
just question to you guys, would you be okay with us sharing this
for
right-size
certain.
parking?
I believe that we did forward both this presentation and the document to Camilla this morning. And I think her intent was to provide that to you as part of the committee of the whole meeting.
Okay,
But we'd be happy to forward it to you here in just 5 minutes, if you would like that.
okay,
But I believe that information was forwarded through Camilla.
okay.
I know it
Yeah.
was.
I'll
But
leave it
just-
to your discretion. Either way, it works for
Yeah.
me. But I think that would be helpful, to share, ahead of time. We will definitely want Mr. Garrison to, present the information. But if folks can, glance through it, and especially in here, because committee of the whole will be in here. They won't be able to read it on the screens, so having it in advance will just give the opportunity for them to be a little bit more familiar with the information.
Yeah, it's not just my eyes, it's the fact that those are not big enough to be able to read all this little print. But the right size parking initiative presentation, and then the actual changes to the zoning ordinance, those are important to have read them before you arrive at committee of the whole, or you won't know what the heck is going on. So, do I hear a motion for us to do something similar to that?
Yes, so moved.
It has been moved and properly seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So we'll
Question?
have a joint meeting next Tuesday.
Yes. My question is, I think the same concerns are likely to be raised about enforcement and then, the reform strategy. So it would probably be beneficial to have BDOT present to cover that information.
And maybe to flesh this one pager out a little bit more so that people know what it means. Because if you just read it, the one pager, it's such a broad overview that you don't really know what it means. So that would probably be a good idea. Because people are reading this stuff into the wee hours of the morning, trying to fit all their reading in. So, when we have agendas with 857 pages in them every Tuesday, 52 weeks a year, it gets to be a lot. We're good at reading, but our eyes are going. So, we have done what we came to do. We are to item 4 on our agenda, which is adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Has been moved and properly seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.